We are now at the marker that the state of Georgia erected to the 37th Tennessee, and very often, or excuse me, 37th Georgia. The state of Georgia did erect some markers to some non-Georgians, but not Tennesseans. The marker for the 37th Georgia, very often, because of where this marker is located, associated with the position of Brannan's division over there, and the gap, Woods Gap, on the 20th right over here. Very often, people have assumed that this marker has something to do with the 20th. And you look across the road, you get the markers for Benning's Brigade on the 20th over there. But no, this is actually a 19th marker, and this is where the state of Georgia erected the marker for the 37th Georgia. And it kind of marks its high water mark. But listen to what Colonel, well actually both of the original Colonel, Rudler, writes. At this critical juncture, the command was given to forward, which was done with spirit, engaging the enemy within 150 yards. After engaging the enemy with considerable success, the order was given to charge a battery immediately in my front. My regiment, the 20th Tennessee and Caswell's sharpshooters, drove them from their guns. That's describing the fight with Gross. As soon as the enemy sheltered himself behind a second battery in the rear of one from which we drove him, he opened with grape and canister, which was so destructive that the regiment became divided. The regiment became divided. A large portion moving forward to the left and the others to the right. At this juncture, I received a slight wound in my right foot, which disabled me from participating further in the battle. For the subsequent action of the regiment in the battle, I respectfully refer to Lieutenant Colonel Smith's report, on whom the command devolved, which I herewith forward. Smith wrote, the regiment on charging the enemy on 4 p.m. became mixed up with a regiment of Law's brigade, and in the confusion incident to such a state of things, about 50 men, several line officers, and myself became separated from the other portion of the regiment, we being on the right flank, and pursued the fleeing enemy in a right oblique direction some 400 or 500 yards. When perceiving that, or what appeared to me to be a brigade of Federals making a charge to the rear of our right, with evident intention of cutting us off, I gave the order to the few men with me to fall back rapidly. Rudler and Smith are on the right of the regiment, and only a small part is with them, and they are over there with the 20th Tennessee and the 4th Battalion, and that Federal counterattack, which is threatening to cut them off, is Turchin's men moving in after having driven Gross back. So what do we have for the rest of the 37th Georgia? I haven't found.
It's impossible to calculate.
I don't have an account from these guys, from the bulk of the regiment.
My map basically, and it's pure supposition, puts a fraction of it going that way, another fraction coming into the field here, and then the 20th and the sharpshooters moving along this side. But the 4th Alabama is mixed up in that, and they're falling back. It's really hard to determine how many men of Bates Brigade get into the field, get out far enough where they're subject to Union artillery fire. I just got through telling somebody, I said that with certainty no more than 700 men tops, counting the 4th Georgia, the 20th Tennessee, and the 37th. I don't see how any more than 700 men as an upper limit figure get out here. And it's probably considerably lower, but I have no way of calculating.
Yeah. So we're trying to devise all of this from a relatively small number of accounts. And unfortunately, for the bulk of the 37th Georgia, we don't have an account.
What about the Union accounts?
Well, the Union accounts seem to think that huge hordes of Confederates are pouring through, here.
As is typical for any after-action report in the Civil War, I was attacked by multitudes.
Yeah. And
That's any
so,
war.
I'm sorry. The federal, if you just go off of the federal accounts, as we will this afternoon, it seems like a huge body of graybacks is pouring out of the woods here.
To what extent do you think Bate is at fault for his brigade fractioning?
Well, I think some of it is natural in this limited visibility forested environment. Since he was on the right of the brigade, seemingly when the advance began, and the right apparently gets into action first. That he's kind of drawn there, but while I think it's kind of natural to him to have been drawn there, I think he is at fault for not trying to be more active to regain control of the brigade.
There's no sense that he tries to get over to the left or direct those troops, or I think even recalling from memory that his report doesn't even mention sending couriers over to.
And you have to wonder with his lack of on foot mobility if he's got horses being shot out from under him.
Yeah, that's the other thing we know. We know he loses what, 2 horses? Didn't he lose 3?
I think it is 3, or at least the mythical story.
Yeah, the Davis story
Yeah,
is.
the Davis story.
Well, isn't one of them on the 20th though?
Could be.
Yeah, I think it's
you're right.
2 horses on the 19th, and then the third one on the 20th.
So if the horse is down, you have to find another horse. You take an age horse, get his saddle with its crutch
Well,
swapped.
he's already in pain, though, right?
Right.
He's already hurting anyway.
Yeah, and
to dull his senses too. I mean,
yeah, who knows? When the first or second horse goes down, how hard was he thrown to the ground? He might have been essentially out of action for X number of minutes, simply letting that pain reside or
the
recede.
adrenaline keeps him going, so he gets back on another horse.
What
Yeah,
has
he's
the
still
surgeon
hurting.
treated him with? Of course, pain.
What's the
That's a
quality?
big thing.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What's the quality of the regimental commanders? I mean, I know Thomas Benton Smith, later becomes brigadier, and
This is Robert Tyler has been a regimental commander in the 15th Tennessee for a time, but this is the first time he's commanding the consolidated regiment. So, how practiced are they at functioning as a consolidated organization? Bush Jones has only become a regimental commander since July. Now, he had been battalion commander, but
he later commands a brigade in Atlanta.
Correct. Right. But the battalion was smaller than the regiment. The regiment's got new people in it, so it may not be functioning real well, regardless of how good Jones is as a regimental commander. And then Rutler, he commander of the 37th Georgia. This is a new organization, consolidation of the 3rd and 9th Georgia. He's been promoted to colonel from the commander of one of those battalions. And I wonder whether he might have some permanent disability. Rutler was a filibuster twice. with William Walker.
Oh,
And in the
really?
second one, he was Walker's second in command. And he was captured with Walker and almost shared Walker's fate. But largely because he was so ill at the time that he was going to be executed, he wasn't, and arrangements were made for him to be sent back to the United States. And he returns back to the United States in a severely ill and debilitated state. And I wonder if he may not have had some kind of permanent debility as a result of that severe illness.
Malaria or something like, yeah.
Right, and so maybe he is not quite as active as he should be.
Yeah.
Additionally, Braxton Bragg in the late spring, early summer before Tullahoma, Braxton Bragg had ordered, having seen high numbers of casualties amongst field officers, majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels at Murfreesboro, Braxton Bragg issued a general order that field officers were to go in on foot. And most of them seemingly do here. There are some exceptions, but the colonel of a regiment going forward on foot is going to reduce his mobility to then control his regiment. And one of the things I've wondered about that sometimes is someone who is traditionally mounted is going to wear a different set of footwear than someone who is traditionally on foot. And being mounted, you need to have your spurs on. And so when these guys who are normally mounted are now dismounted and expected to move forward on foot, do they actually, does their footwear, do their boots limit their movement in some way? Does the fact that they have their spurs on with the leather strap that might catch vegetation and the like, does that potentially affect their movement? So there are a lot of factors, and I'd love to find some more accounts to dig into some of that. But I think this being a new brigade in so many ways is another factor.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim,
Yes.
you talk about how much responsibility Bay is for his brigade breaking up and that, going different directions. What about AP Stewart? Is that his job to kind of make sure that everything's going as planned, so to speak? And he's with one new brigade down there. I mean, can he not just sort of ignore this up here? I mean, how much responsibility does he have in not doing what he may could have done?
I'm not sure he's even aware of this up here. It would require someone to go tell him that fate is advancing in this direction, and this all happens very quickly, very spontaneously.
Where are the division and corps command? I know Bragg's back by the river. Where are the division and corps command?
Well, corps commanders, Bragg has sent Leonidas Polk up here to get a handle on the fighting that involves Forrest, William H.T. Walker and 2 divisions, and Polk's own division under Ben Frank Cheatham. And Bragg then sends him Stewart. And Polk is supposed to get a handle on that. But if you think about Polk at Murfreesboro, at Perryville, at Shiloh, at Belmont, Polk never has a handle on anything at any of those battlefields.
Polk is basically backed by the Alexandria.
Yeah. In fact, the Sam Watkins account of Polk riding along Maney's brigade before it goes into action is always used to kind of denigrate Polk. And I don't know that that's entirely fair. Watkins says that Cheatham rode along the brigade line just before they went into action, and Polk was riding with Cheatham, and the hard-fighting, hard-drinking Tennessean, Ben Frank Cheatham, riding down the line, says, "Give 'em hell, boys! Give 'em hell, boys!" Polk, the Episcopal Bishop of Louisiana, unable to use that profane word, was riding along behind Cheatham saying, "Give him what the general says, boys, give him what the general says." I don't know that that's entirely a fair assessment of Polk, but it's also not entirely incorrect. But Polk does not seem to get, he does not get a handle on what's going on up here.
If AP Stewart is aware of anything, it's that breakthrough with Clayton.
Yeah.
And arguably say, why didn't he go round up Brown? That's about the only criticism of him that I could deliver there.
Except for the fact that Brown seems to have perceived there was coming an attack coming from a different quarter, and he had to stay in place to do that.
There's not enough.
And when you think about the federal pressure on this end down there, and Brown's lost 3 of his 5 regimental commanders, and
So it's a mild.
actually doing something like that?
that's what that's the point.
Turchin's coming from that direction, and actually, from where Brown's perception is, we can have Hazen moving down this corridor. We'll talk again. We're getting ahead of ourselves for the afternoon, but that's not a bad apprehension or understanding of the situation in Brown.
We have cleared. We have thinned the understory in several places of the battlefield, and maybe I should look at doing this as an anniversary program sometime. The Army, or the military, now has some smoke generating canisters, which do not use a thermal reaction to generate the smoke. After years of popping smoke canisters and throwing them somewhere, and it having creating a fire, they finally generated ones that don't produce a great deal of heat. One Utah National Guard group actually used them here, but you know, might be interesting to one of these places where we thin the vegetation, hit some of those things one time, put all of us in the middle of the woods there, pop a bunch of those things, and then say, okay, now try to coordinate this. You know, you can't see more than 200 yards down through the woods at best, and then that visibility is going to diminish dramatically as the smoke of the battle gets trapped overhead. And even some of these guys who seemingly give us good accounts, maybe they're not seeing anything more than what happened right 10 yards in front of them. So, I think this battle challenges your leadership. And the Confederates are generally the ones in the offensive, the forward advance. And so they are moving, and that's going to challenge communications even more. In almost all cases, the Federals, while they might have initially advanced, once they become engaged, the Federals stop, and while they might be driven back, the Federals are being driven back slower, which gives, I think, their leaders more time to potentially react. So this is the high water mark of Bates' attack. They're going to be stopped. The real and perceived potential pressure on flanks, and Bates now got lots of flanks. It's going to force them to fall back, but they're not going to go back quite as far as you might think they're going to go back. So, other questions or observations?
We want to address the super battery that's up here and that breaks up some of the Bates attack.
Well, we were going to do that this afternoon. So yeah, but it is worth saying that what stops the Confederates at this point is a line of guns that's going to be formed across the north end of the field. If you look up there where Babline Road comes out of the woods, you can see the guns for Battery F, 1st Ohio Light Artillery. But that's what's going to stop the line here.
How far do they get up? Does base brigade get up through the field?
I don't think they get very far into the field at all. Maybe up to where the Georgia monument is.
On the one plaque back here, it had that base was part of Buckner's Corps. Buckner had just come down from Knoxville, right? And that was part of that. Hey, Longstreet, you got here. Here's kind of a reorganization. It would be pretty ineffective.
Well, the reorganization that affects Stewart and Bate had occurred on September the 3rd. As Bragg is responding to reports about federal activity along the Tennessee River upstream of Chattanooga, the deception by Crittenden, Palmer, Wilder, Minty, Bragg had sent Stewart's division of Hill's Corps upstream on the Tennessee River to help guard the potential crossing sites against the federal crossing. Well, because Claiborne had already been moved up there, Stewart just keeps getting shuffled further and further to the north, and eventually he is within the orbit of Buckner. And so on September the 3rd, Braxton Bragg reorganized the Army and assigned Stewart to Buckner. Took him from D.H. Hill and assigned him to Buckner. And so he's been working for Buckner now since the 3rd, but it's still a relatively new organization. Buckner has had to create any sort of field command, field staff, because he did not have such when he was in East Tennessee. So he's had to create a field staff, now essentially a corps staff, out of whole cloth entirely. At most they've had about 2 weeks to figure out how to make things work.
Buckner's other division had sort of a dry run of that in July in Tullahoma when they were moved to reinforce Bragg. And technically Buckner commanded Bragg's quote-unquote 3rd Corps, though Bragg and Buckner argued about how independent Buckner was supposed to be. But as a field organization in the field, this is brand new.
Well, I mean, Preston's division was not really a division until all that happened. I mean,
exactly,
it was scattered units that.
The brigade elements that moved down in July the brigades are actually different compositions
Right.
that come down in September.
Right.
So everything is still very fluid.
Okay. To emulate the withdrawal and also to the shortest distance between 2 points, one of the places where we have thinned the vegetation is between here and the crest of the rise.